what happened when Intact America received $1 million from Dean Pisani for starting this Intact America, because Marilyn, I guess, felt that she needed some help with that. So she declined to take the $1 million directly, but Intact America took it and formed the organization, the nonprofit. By that time, I had already been perceived as a threat to Marilyn.
Today we got the founder of NoCirc Michigan, Norm Cohen, today on the show. Welcome, Norm.
Thank you for having me, David.
You've been in the movement for a very long time, over 30 years. You were even featured in documentary Whose Body, Whose Right.
Yes.
And in that documentary, you've spoken about growing up as the son of a rabbi, and you were deeply immersed in Jewish rituals. And I was wondering if you could share how that shaped your earliest understanding of circumcision and what it meant to you back then.
Sure. I had no idea that circumcision was harmful. I just accepted the narrative, both from the Jewish community and from the general population in America, that circumcision was a good thing. In Sunday school, I do remember being taught that Jewish women had less cervical cancer. So they were repeating the statements from the 50s and the studies that were flawed had done at that time. And so there was some defensiveness, I think, in the Jewish community, even in the 70s when I was in Sunday school, to sort of defend circumcision as like, well, it's medically necessary anyway, so don't harp on it from a modernist perspective.
That's really interesting.
By the time I was 17, though, I was an atheist. I was very science-minded. I was a big skeptic, thought for myself, and I was really interested in getting at the truth as far as religion goes. I understood religion as a tool for control and for power, as I still do. So by 17, I told my dad that I was an atheist. That did not go over very well. But I still didn't think about circumcision. I thought I was over and done with Judaism, and I went on to get an engineering degree at UC Berkeley and wanted to just advance my career. I wasn't trying to be an activist about anything. I was really very self-interested in pursuing my career. That was my only goal. When I was married, though, we discussed, having a child, and that's when I first came across a very small little ad from NoCirc Michigan, not NoCirc Michigan, NoCirc National in San Francisco. Marilyn Milos had placed a little ad in one of the movement of the time, which was the men's awareness movement, that we did talking circles as men in the 80s and 90s, getting in touch with our feelings and doing our work emotionally as men to try and overcome some of the stereotypes and some of the oppressive natures of masculinity. So I did encounter in those groups another sentiment about circumcision, was that it was an oppression for boys and men. And this really blew my mind as soon as I read Marilyn's pamphlet, because it was like everything I was told about circumcision, literally down to the last dot, was all wrong. And I was angry at that point, having been deceived, and also a little angry at myself for having just been as gullible for 10 years as an atheist that I didn't even think about circumcision.
It gets so ingrained, it's hard to even think outside of the norm, the cultural norm.
I found on my penis all the remnants of a Mogan clamp circumcision, the skin tag and the jagged scar and the effects of loss of sensitivity by that time that I began to experience. So it was written in my body. I just wasn't paying attention until I had the information. Once I had the information, I could go back to my body and say, what's going on here? There really is some damage here.
That must have been really shocking to have been able to connect the dots there.
Yeah, and I did go through a period of anger there. And I said, somebody really ought to do something about this circumcision problem. We really ought to do something about it. It hadn't occurred to me that I might be one of those people. It was just sort of a thing that I thought, well, somebody else I'm sure is going to work on this, because, this is an outrage. So 5 years I was aware of the information, but I was not an intactivist. I was just an ally. I donated money to NoCirc and then finally to No Harm when they got started as an organization. So it was only very slowly, when my friends of childbearing age, they were having children and I had not spoken out. And I felt a tremendous guilt, that I could have prevented their boys from getting circumcised. And these were smart parents that would have listened and that would know better if they'd only given the information. So that's when Tim Hammond contacted me and asked me to be a field organizer in Detroit. I said, okay, but I can only do it a couple hours a week or so. I don't really have a lot of time. I was trying to start my own business, and I was still focused on myself. But I said, okay, I'll set up a table at the state fairgrounds and hand out some information. I realized I really enjoyed doing that.
What's exactly the story of NoCirc Michigan and how it began?
Well, that's quite interesting because I had no plans on being a 501c3 nonprofit corporation. I contacted Marilyn, and she had already had a network of chapters. You have to understand that in every state there was a NoCirc center, which she called centers. That's from the abbreviation. So there were centers or contacts for people who were already the local organizer. And then Tim Hammond of No Harm, he mimicked that with his field organizer program. And he put out even a guide, a printed binder that he would send us on all the things that we could do, and masters for all of the printed handouts that we were going to hand out and everything. So there was a framework in place for centers locally, handing out information mostly at tables at baby fairs and community events. That was already in place in the 90s. We were already doing that, and it's a shame that we don't have that today. But that's what I signed up for. I said, okay, I like the approach that NoCirc is making. They seem to be leaders in the field at that time. And so I said, sign me up. I'll be the NoCirc of Detroit chapter. And that's what I signed up for. And we started doing these local tables and everything. So I was just a chapter, and I was given a lot of freedom from Marilyn, to do things the way I felt was best. And that proceeded for several years. We just continued to do that. It was a nice, innocent little community of intactivists around the country. We would get together once or twice a year, sometimes at Marilyn's house, sometimes in Washington, D.C. later. And, we were a tight knit little community because it was us against the world. So there was nobody else there. We didn't have to compete with other groups because there was no other group to speak of. That it was just NoCirc. And so there was mutual support, and a lot less infighting than there is today. It was thought of more of as a family rather than any kind of formal organization. Unfortunately, that changed over the years. What happened when Intact America received $1 million from Dean Pisani for starting this Intact America, because Marilyn, I guess, felt that she needed some help with that. So she declined to take the $1 million directly, but Intact America took it and formed the organization, the nonprofit. By that time, I had already been perceived as a threat to Marilyn because I was doing so much more locally and more effective work on the ground, doing a far more greater number of tables, producing my own information. And I think this was a source of threat to Marilyn. She felt that maybe I was overshadowing her in the local work and in my vision and my energy that I was able to bring to the movement. I certainly had the credentials as the son of a rabbi, now speaking out against circumcision, beginning to take just a little bit a national role in trying to shape the narrative and the leadership. Often, my ideas were not accepted, but I did feel that, well, if I was going to put all this time and money into it, I was going to have a stake. I was going to be a stakeholder, and that meant having a seat at the table and being able to really influence the course and the strategy and the tactics that we were going to use. I wasn't just going to be a bystander. That's not what I'm about. I'm much more of a leader than a follower. So
Right.
I'm sure that rubbed people the wrong way, but nevertheless, I felt like, well, this is what I want to do with my life, and so I gave up the idea of having my own software business in favor of this unpaid job for doing intactivism. I did have a regular job, so I paid a part-timer to work here in my home office for NoCirc Michigan. So for several years, I actually paid an employee to do the day-to-day administrative and clerical tasks of running what was then even just a chapter of the national NoCirc. But then Marilyn, on her own accord, without consulting me, said, well, we're going to disband all of the chapters and just rename and rebrand ourselves. And she demanded that I change the name, that I give up the name of NoCirc of Michigan. She had not trademarked it. She had not licensed it to me. There's no reason why I needed to give up the name legally. And my name, the NoCirc name of Michigan, was already out there. So I was never going to give it up. And I did consult an attorney. And so I was on solid ground on that. And so to this day now, it's NoCirc of Michigan. We filed for a nonprofit in 2016 and received our tax exempt status from the IRS. So we're completely independent. We have no connections with the National Organization of Circumcision Information Resource Centers. We are just NoCirc of Michigan. We do have a board. We do have meetings. I try to run it as a nonprofit would any well-run nonprofit might run. That's always constrained by the time that I have. And the challenge is much more about time than money. I make good money as a software engineer. So it's never been a great limitation for money. It's been a great limitation for the time that I have it in order not to burn out, in order to sustain myself and my own balance in life, that I've had to make some compromises in running the nonprofit.
Hi, it's Scott, interrupting the interview for a moment to tell you about POTS's e-commerce program. To use it, you get the links from what you want to buy on Amazon or eBay. Then you send them to POTS through X or Discord in a direct message or on order ideas on Discord. And POTS will post them in the comments on a YouTube video or in an X post. Then you follow those links that are connected to POTS's Amazon or eBay store, and you buy those items, and POTS will get a percentage of that sale. This funds POTS's expenses to promote the channel and contract with other intactivists. This does not cost you any extra money. All right, thank you, and back to the interview.
Looking at the website, I could see that you got a lot of events going on, and you're very active. One of the most active protest groups I've seen.
Yeah, so my approach from the start was bottom-up intactivism. So that means that we work at the grassroots level. We reach individual parents and decision makers and influencers like doctors and nurses. We don't try to win the lottery by ending Medicaid's circumcision or by passing a law against it or doing anything either at the state level or the national level. I have tried some of that and it wasn't effective. So with the budget that we have and the time that I have, I much rather approach it from an individual level. And that's really, how circumcision started, is that it was socialized among parents and their doctors to do circumcision as some sort of newfangled benefit at the turn of the 20th century. So we're doing the reverse, we're socializing it as a harm, that this is a harm to children and to the men that they become. So we don't want to try and win the lottery in one fell swoop. It hasn't worked. And I feel like that's the best contribution that I can give to the intactivist movement, is to work at that retail level of tabling and doing events, protests. We have our 14th annual Michigan March for Integrity is September 13th, 2025. I'm very proud to say that it's the largest hospital protest in the United States against circumcision.
So when NoCirc became its own entity, did that have anything to do with the fact that NoCirc actually became Genital Autonomy America?
So that phrase, genital autonomy, was a successor phrase to genital integrity. Right. And I was all about genital integrity. Genitals, first of all, don't have autonomy. So it's sort of an absurd claim to begin with. I understand what they're trying to say is that the autonomous individual needs to be able to make that claim. And so bodily autonomy has been used in this context and in reproductive context, which is fine. It is bodily autonomy, but it's not genital autonomy. And then more recently, we have to get into the discussion of, well, what is autonomy, and is it manufactured consent that is sort of manipulated so that someone can claim to be acting autonomously when really they've been manipulated into consent? So also to understand that circumcision is objectively harmful. It's not in the eyes of the beholder. We've used mutilation for many, many years. This is a mutilation. So it doesn't matter whether you want it to be done or not. It is a mutilation. And so I don't believe objectively that there's any benefit to having circumcision. This is not something that I'm not going to back the autonomous choices as someone claims that they want a circumcision. They're harming themselves. But not only that, they're asking the medical community to participate in the harm. And people forget that, is that in order to get circumcised, you need a circumciser, unless you're going to be crazy enough to try to do it yourself. But to be autonomous is actually really to depend on somebody else to deliver this thing. And so we can hold the medical community responsible, as we do. They're a regulated industry. The state and the federal government has always regulated the medical profession. So they can't just do whatever they want.
I noticed that on the Intactivist Circle, which is another group that you had founded, you actually wrote an entire article about the difference between the two. And if you look at the definitions, they seem very different. The term itself implies that circumcision is a valid option. And if we truly believe it's the genital mutilation that it is, then why would we be saying such things?
Exactly. It is a mutilation, plain and simple. I got a lot of heat at the time because that phrase was catching on. I don't think it's used as widely anymore, but it was being used quite a bit at the time. Have this sort of liberal approach to saying, well, you can make the decision, when you're old enough, and I would have to accept that. But the point is that it's a bad decision, and there's no relativistic world where you could say that circumcision is a good decision. It's just not. So I don't believe that autonomy has the final say. It's much more about the objective reality of the function of foreskin.
What do you believe NoCirc of Michigan does better than most other activist groups?
Well, first of all, I don't like the drama of competing with the other intactivist groups. We're not businesses. There's no profit motive. So, I can say what has worked for me, which is doing the tabling, doing the annual events, creating a formula for the tables and the volunteers so that we can repeat it easily over and over again. There's some events that we've been at for many years. The Ann Arbor Art Fair, for example, we've been there for 29 years. And so I have a routine down on how to do the Ann Arbor Art Fair, for example. So that has helped me from burning out. I don't have to keep reinventing myself or discovering every new possible thing that can go wrong. I have understood it, how to do it, how to recruit, and how to table. So meeting people where they are, working on effective communication skills, effective handouts, visuals, all of that is really very important. That's what we do well. I've had to learn the Adobe Creative Suite pretty well to design my own graphics and whatnot. So I'm proud of the tabling that we're able to do.
Yeah, it's really interesting. If Marilyn Milos herself even thought that you were potentially doing better than her own efforts, that's really interesting. You must be onto something.
Right. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a physician. I'm not a politician. So most intactivists, they can work at the local level. They just need some guidance, some framework in which to work as a chapter, which is why I was so disappointed with Intact America not setting up chapters or repeating what Marilyn had done in granting money to the local chapters for tabling events. And with the kind of money that they received, every state should have had a chapter, should have been doing 4 or 5 events every year. We should have had a leadership training annual event with guides and everything that you might do with some of the other political organizations that you might know of is that they have a chapter model where they train their local leaders, and those leaders then train the local volunteers, and they're able to distribute a common message, an effective message. And we just don't have that. Still, after all these years, we don't. It's very sad.
Okay, guys, that was Norm, the executive director of NoCirc of Michigan. Let me know your thoughts by commenting down below. I will have all of his links down below. Anyways, please give this a like to spread this video further and subscribe so you don't miss part 2 and our other Intactivist interviews along with other Intactivist content we release every single week and much more. Thank you guys so much for watching. Bye!
No fear, no fiction. Truth in transmission. Prevail over the system. Our vision's the difference.